As Censored Gaming has spoke about in the past, sometimes censorship is decided not by rating systems or governments, but the companies behind the platforms that games are released for. An example of this can be seen when comparing the Nintendo 64 release of Conker's Bad Fur Day and its Xbox 360 remake Live and Reloaded. In the Xbox version, many instances of bad language were removed and replaced with beeped out dialogue. What makes this especially notable is how the original Conker set out to push boundaries with its very adult themes, yet as Censored Gaming confirmed by speaking to the original developers, Microsoft personally told the devs to tone the language down for the remake. This is far from the only example of this sort of thing though, and it's something that all major platform owners have at least some experience in doing. So without further ado, here are 5 video games Sony forced to be censored. Number 1. Ratchet and Clank: A Crack in Time. During the 2000s, Ratchet and Clank was one of PlayStation's biggest platforming mascots, and the series has seen many games released for various PlayStation systems such as PS2, PSP and PS3. The franchise is quite family friendly at heart, but also sometimes likes to add a bit of innuendo and other adult jokes from time to time for older audiences. Examples of this can be seen with the game's names, which whilst at first glance may seem quite innocent, if you take a closer look you'll realise that most of the game's subtitles are forms of suggestive innuendos. Going Commando, or Pure Arsenal, Size Matters, Full Frontal Assault. Starting to notice the trend. Interestingly, most of these names were changed when released for European markets, which is something Censored Gaming has covered in the past. It's not known why most of the innuendo-filled names were altered in Europe, however what we do know is that for A Crack in Time the name had to be changed worldwide, and that this was under direct orders from Sony. The info was revealed in a podcast back in 2009 where developers Insomniac explained how they wanted to call the game Clock Blockers instead. Clock Blockers was chosen as it would have carried on with the tradition of suggestive titles while also representing the game's time travelling theme. Insomniac revealed that Sony wouldn't allow them to do this though, as Sony found it too rude and so it had to be changed. Furthermore, whilst perhaps only a coincidence, most of the games released following A Crack in Time also had much less innuendo filled names. But moving on to number 2, BMX XXX. Whilst perhaps seeming a little silly now we're in 2017, back in 2002 this game was very controversial. The game is quite similar to the Tony Hawk franchise, except it involves BMXs and contains plenty of nudity and adult humour. BMX XXX was heavily marketed based upon its sex appeal and generated a lot of publicity and controversy. Many US retail chains refused to sell the title, and over in Australia it was even completely banned. The ESRB however saw the game fit for an M rating and not the higher adults only classification, but despite this the US branch of Sony announced that they would not be allowing the title to be released in its original form on their PlayStation 2 system. Surprisingly though, the European Sony branch didn't have any issues with it, and neither did Microsoft or Nintendo. Speaking about the situation to IGN, a Sony representative explained, "We asked Acclaim to cover the topless females. We worked with Acclaim on the game and none of the changes we asked to be made affected gameplay. We didn't feel that the topless nudity fundamentally added to the gameplay experience, and it presented an issue with regard to our global platform strategy and our guidelines. And because we have invested so much and have built in so much equity to our system, we feel the need to protect that." So due to Sony's decision, the US PS2 version has various changes, including removing the breast size slider from the rider editor menu, adding censor bars to any nudity in the strip club movies as well as drastically reducing them in length, plus making it no longer possible to customize your rider's appearance so that they are fully topless. Next up is number 3, Policenauts. Similar to BMX XXX, here Sony stepped in and wouldn't allow Policenauts to be released for their system unless the devs made some changes. Policenauts is a cult classic visual novel adventure game created by Metal Gear Solid's Hideo Kojima. The game was originally released in 1994 for the NEC PC-98 system and was then later ported to the 3DO, the PlayStation as well as the Sega Saturn. Now, as is usually the case with Kojima's titles, Policenauts likes to mix in humour and other occasional quirkiness with the game's more serious themes. This approach led to the creation of a breast touching system where you could, at will, choose to feel the breasts of many of the female characters within Policenauts' world. Doing so would lead to a breast bouncing animation and unique dialogue from the characters involved. None of the other platforms had any issues with this mechanic, and there was no controversy or anything over in Japan because of it. However, when it came time for Policenauts' PlayStation release, Sony's company president personally informed Kojima that he will have to tone this down. The folks at Junker HQ have translated a few quotes from Kojima of him discussing the issue, and Kojima describes them getting into an intense dispute over the breast touching. Kojima was not at all happy about this, and his response was something like, "Oh, give me a break." So due to Sony stepping in, the PlayStation release not only drastically reduced the amount of times that you could do this, but it also toned down the breast bounce animation as shown here, with the PlayStation version on the left and the Saturn version on the right. Number 4. Bombin Bastards. Bombin Bastards is a Bomberman inspired game released on the Wii U and Steam back in 2014. As you probably noticed, the game's name is quite eye-catching, and neither Nintendo or Valve had any issues with the word bastards being contained in the game's name. When it came time for the PS4 and Vita release though, Sony did, and told the developers that they would need to change the name. So due to this, the game had to be renamed to Bombin Busters instead. You can see the Nintendo store page here listing the title with the Bombin Bastards name, as well as the Steam page here. And finally, number 5, Twisted Metal. The PS3 release of Twisted Metal had various changes over in Europe, and developers Eat Sleep Play have confirmed that this was under orders from Sony, Twisted Metal's publisher as well as the platform owner. Series director David Jaffe spoke about the decision over on NearGaf and didn't hold back at all when it came to his views on the matter. To quote, "Come on, you think I wanted to change content? Fuck no. For a bunch of reasons, fuck no. But it ain't my game. Sony owns the IP and funded it, and certain countries have obviously much stricter guidelines, and since Twisted Metal has never been a big seller outside of America, I guess it didn't make sense to have a whole bunch of different discs for each country, i.e. Germany gets disc version 3, UK gets disc version 6, etc. He also later makes it clear that he hates cuts being made to the original versions of games. Twisted Metal's changes include cutting to black during quite a few violent moments in cutscenes, as well as changes to 2 of the vehicle's weapons. In the US version, there exists a weapon that sees a screaming human on a stretcher being used as a missile, as well as a similar weapon except it's a screaming human in a coffin. For both of these, the screaming humans were replaced by corpses instead. As David mentioned, it is clear that Sony felt it would be more economical to only release one version of the game over in Europe, rather than multiple versions for different European territories. It is likely that a stricter region such as Germany may have needed this censorship for it to be released, and so the whole of Europe ended up being affected. This is not that common of a practice in regards to handling European censorship, and usually places like Germany will receive their own edited versions. However, Sony actually has a pretty lengthy history of handling European releases this way. One notable case is 2013's The Last of Us, which toned down the violence during multiplayer in all European versions, and then later made the same changes for the PS4 remastered release. Another example is God of War Ascension, which had a few changes made to violent cutscenes again in the whole of Europe. It's important to stress though that Sony are not alone in making decisions like these, and that all major companies have done similar things in the past. Censored Gaming will undoubtedly make videos in the future looking at past examples from other companies such as Microsoft, and as always, we'll also continue to keep you up to date on the latest news and goings on in the world of censorship. If that's something you might be interested in checking out, then please make sure to hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below, and until next time, thank you for watching.